I have existed since 1996, and I shall exist until the last review has been posted. Although I have taken on the form of Thomas Jonathan Pricekick McClelland, I am all reviewers as I am no reviewer, and therefore I am a god, I guess. Good evening, YouTuber viewers. My name is Germanicus. I am the son of the great hero Testicles, and of my mother Clitia. I am the brother to Gluteus Maximus. I am the uncle to Maximus Genitalia, and the grandson of the great emperor Bicus Dicus. You may have heard of him. Today, I shall speak to you of another Roman emperor. A Roman emperor who nearly brought it to its knees in more than one way. A Roman emperor whose name inspires fear. Gaius Julius Augustus Germanicus, or as you know him as, Caligula. Yes, Caligula. The third emperor of Rome. He ruled from 37 AD to 41 AD, and in that short amount of time, he caused the most chaos and madness to the Roman people. Or did he? That is the subject of many debate, one that has inspired many a play, and also of a sonnet, and of a novel, and of a movie. And today we are talking about a particular movie based off the life of Caligula, and that is, Caligula, directed by, well, I'll get in that later. You see, this film, much like Caligula's life itself, is full of controversy, madness, and biasness, we'll call it. But first, let's get one thing straight. This review is not going to be just about the movie, but about the man himself, because the movie itself is, sometimes unenjoyable and unpleasant to those who have a weak constitution. So, you must forgive me if I prefer more to history than the movie, but guilty as charged. Let us talk then about who was Caligula. Caligula was the third emperor of Rome. He was the grandson of Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. Well, at least by adoption. It's a very complicated family tree. The first one technically was Julius Caesar in a way, but he didn't technically become emperor because he was murdered. Sad day, I'm afraid. But Augustus, he managed to become the first emperor of Rome, of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Unfortunately, Augustus didn't have any sons, and the ones he did had all died. So he was forced to name his nephew Tiberius as emperor. Yes, Tiberius. He was a cruel man, a man driven to madness by his paranoia. But out of that family was another child, that of Caligula. Now, Caligula is not actually his real name. As I've said before, his real name was Gaius, actually. Caligula was just the name that the soldiers gave him. See, Caligula was the son of Germanicus, a great Roman general, and of Augustine the Elder, or something like that. And basically, his father would take him on his raids of the Germanic tribes, and this little boy was dressed in the Roman garb and forced to dance. The soldiers adored him as a little mascot. They even gave him the name Caligula, meaning little boot in Latin, which was the name of the sandals that were given to him. So, people wonder, why make a movie about this child who will become one of the most hated men in Roman history? Well, that's because the story of Caligula is shrouded in mystery. Even today, we still don't know the full story due to the fact of one thing. The story of Caligula has been written by 2 Roman historians, and most of them were born hundreds of years after Caligula's death, and they had some pretty nasty things to say about him. Good old Roman propaganda at its finest. So, the story of Caligula has been shrouded in the idea that he was a madman who simply just killed at the drop of a hat and had massive orgies and all that stuff. But the real truth of Caligula is that we really don't know anything about him. So that has left people to use their imaginations to fill in the gaps. So, that's after that. Now, Caligula himself, as a little boy, was described as a temperamental little brat, to say the least. As he should be, because he was the son of a great famous Roman general, and he was also spoiled beyond compare. But Tiberius had it out for Caligula's family. You see, in his old age, Tiberius got paranoid that people were going to kill him. And so, he set up these fake trials to kill anyone suspected of heresy or treason. And that included Caligula's father, Germanicus, and his mother. So, Germanicus was arrested, and later he was found poisoned, which everybody knew it was Tiberius who did it. So, after that, Caligula's brothers were put into jail. One was forced to commit suicide, the other one wasted away, and then his mother, Agrippina the Elder, was killed and stabbed by a Roman assassin who later committed suicide. Thus ended the dynasty, thus ended the last of Augustus's reign, or his kin at least. Now there was only Tiberius. But Tiberius had forgotten something. He took no issue with the young Caligula. In fact, what he did was quite shocking. When Caligula came of age, well, before that, Caligula was sent away to live with his aunt and his sisters, who we'll get into in a minute, particularly one in particular. Caligula was basically left alone for the longest time. But then, one day, when Caligula came of age, Tiberius had taken him and ordered him to come to the Isle of Capri. Now, why Capri? Well, there's 2 reasons. One, it was Tiberius's headquarters. Tiberius had grown frustrated and he'd grown suspicious of the Roman council, so he moved all of his worldly goods to Capri. And for good reason too. He could do what he wanted there. He would sleep with teenagers and then have them killed afterwards. He would host elaborate parties, and if you were suspected of being an assassin, you were thrown off the cliffs of Capri to the waters below, and if you survived, you would be beaten to death with wooden oars. So, Caligula was forced to live there under the watchful eye of his adoptive grandfather Tiberius. But while he was there, Tiberius, well, as he said, he wanted to keep an eye on Caligula, but he had taken a liking to the young man. He had taught him in all things that a good Roman should know about: debauchery, corruption, torture, rape, killing, murdering, pestiling, all that. And basically, Caligula was given the lesson that all life was useless, and you should seek as much pleasure and enjoyment at other people's expenses as much as possible. In fact, it's even stated that Caligula hosted orgies of his own on Capri, and had even had people tortured for his own amusement, to the point where even Tiberius had said, "I am nursing a viper for the Roman people." But he didn't seem to care because, well, Caligula was biding his time there, pretty much. He was trying to find a way when to get his chance to rule. Which didn't have to be long, because around the same time that he came there, Tiberius was growing ill from old age, and Caligula was making allies in the court, and particularly one person, Pontius Macro, head of the Praetorian Guard, who believed that Caligula, being a son of the great general Germanicus, would restore order to the throne if he was elected as emperor. And so, one night, Supposedly, a cry was heard out, and out in the morning, Tiberius was found dead in his bed. Apparently died in his sleep, although there was strong evidence at the time that Caligula and Macro had suffocated the old man in his sleep. So, Caligula, a man who had never been elected into politics, a man with no training, no experience, was now Rome's third emperor. And at first, it was actually quite good. You see, the Roman people were sick of Tiberius at the time, and they should have been, because Tiberius was basically the Roman equivalent of Stalin. He would have trials all the time, out of the blue, at the whim of a hat, pretty much. He would kill anyone suspected of being a traitor. He would keep lists of everyone who he suspected to be traitors, and he would keep everyone monitored in Rome. It was not a good time to be a Roman. So Caligula wanted to ingratiate himself with the people of Rome. First thing he did was he raised the army's raised the army's salary, so now that the army would be loyal to him, which they were thanks to the help of Macro also. He ingratiated himself with the Senate. He also managed to publicly burn all of Tiberius's lists of suspected traitors, but don't tell anyone, he kept a copy for himself. So, people in Rome loved this young little emperor. He was bringing parties and gladiatorial games. He was bringing the circus and bread back to Rome. People adored Caligula. But never forget that in his heart, Caligula still held a shard of ice that made him cold and calculating. Well, not calculating, but something like that. So the good times were lasting, but not too long, because soon after he had been taken in as emperor, the young emperor had fallen ill. There were suspicions that he was poisoned, but in all reality he probably just caught fever or some sort of disease. And after he caught the fever, many people begged to the god Jupiter, "Save our beloved emperor, take me in his stead." And Jupiter obliged. Jupiter had saved Caligula from the brink of death. However, it is as Suetonius said, the monster was soon born. For as you see, after Caligula was better, something had snapped in the young emperor's mind. Caligula was taken... Well, he invited all of the senators who had begged for his life to a dinner party. And he had asked them, "When are you going to do it?" And one of the senators said, "My lord, well, you said you were going to give yourself to Jupiter in your stead if I should be alive, so when are you going to die?" And with that, he forced every member that had swore that they would take their own life if Caligula had lived. He forced them to kill themselves. And that was just the beginning. The madness of Caligula had begun. Now, like I say, a lot of this is based off of Roman propaganda, so I don't know if it's entirely true, but for the sake of entertainment, I'm going to list off a few of the things he supposedly did. One thing he did, supposedly he would go to gladiatorial games, and if he got bored, he would say, "From the people in that row there to that row there, put them all in the arena right there." So everyone who was sitting in that particular row at the time was forced to fight in the gladiatorial games against their will. And if that wasn't enough, more was to come, allegedly. There was also rumors that he had pulled back Tiberius's old treason trials and been on the hunt for anyone suspected of being a traitor, even if they weren't. Caligula would go to people's weddings where he would enjoy himself too much, shall we say. And what do I mean by that? He would supposedly look at a pretty girl, and if he liked her, he would say, "Come with me, my dear." He would have her in the back rooms, come out, congratulate the husband, and then personally explain all of her performances in bed, shall we say. sometimes he would marry people on the whim, just like that, and then he would just force them and say, you may never be allowed to marry again, pretty much. And also, during dinner parties, he would supposedly have golden leaf poured on his food, a giant pearl would be dropped into a goblet of wine, and he would enjoy himself by seeing people being tortured slowly to death in front of him. But who's to say, really? Now, why would he do this? There's a lot of theories about that. Some say it might be due to mental stress from his family, seeing his family all murdered in front of him, his darling sister Drusilla just dying, which forced him to go on a huge gambling spree. There's also been a lot of suggestions that he may have slept with his sisters. We're not entirely sure if that's true, but he did seem like the type. He was known to also take young boys to bed, so who knows. There's also a suggestion that the wine that Caligula drank had a potion of lead in it, which led to lead poisoning, which sometimes causes madness in a person. But whatever the case, Caligula was quite extreme. He would literally proclaim himself as a god that he would talk to Jupiter and many other gods. He would prove that he could be an emperor. One time somebody said that Caligula had more chances of being an emperor than riding his horse over the Lake Nene, which he did by literally making a bridge out of boats. In fact, some of these boats were so big that you could fit an entire cavalcade of a circus in there. I'm not even kidding, that's a real thing. And speaking of his horse, his beloved Incitatus, there's always that rumor that he would have made his horse a co-emperor or something like that, or a head of the Roman gods. But that's also Roman propaganda. You see what I mean? Apparently, supposedly, Caligula said to a senator, "You're so useless, I might as well make my horse Incitatus co-emperor." And that just right there was made into the whole lie about the whole horse thing. But there are some true facts about Caligula. Caligula supposedly wanted to become a conqueror and emperor. So, he set forth with an army to invade Britain. Along the way, he attacked a few German tribes that were revolting, although some sources say he just had his soldiers dress up as Germans and then had them attacked, pretty much. And when he did get to the Isles of Britain, well, he stand on the coast of the French coast and was going to invade that way. But then he told his soldiers to drop their weapons, drop their armor, go into the beaches and collect as many seashells as possible, because they were not invading Britain, they were declaring war on Poseidon, apparently. Or Neptune, technically. I don't know why, it just is. Now, while that is true, there is something people forget to notice. Now, it's not speculated, but there were a couple of forts put up on the French coast near Britain, which would soon be used by Claudius to invade Britain, and supposedly those were actually set up by Caligula. So maybe he had aspirations for conquering Britain, but he didn't want to do it because he, well, quite frankly, was running out of money. Which then brings up to another myth of Caligula, is that he made whores of the senators' wives and daughters. Now, it is true that he would have had senators' daughters and senators' families staying with him at his palace in Rome. He would more likely just keep them there and say, "Behave, senators, or I shall have them all killed." Yes, he was that kind of guy. Believe me, he would supposedly just laugh out and someone would ask him what's so funny and someone would say, "I just had the slightest feeling that if I wanted to, I could kill you all here with the sleight of my hand." Allegedly, but... And also he was known to have these giant sort of conways all over Rome that he could ride his horse around, like a private street just for him to do his charioteering. Although sometimes he would just like to charioteer into the streets and just run over random people. Let's just say if you were in Rome during Caligula's reign, there's a good chance you probably would get killed for no any reason. Although the rest of the empire was quite stable, actually, strangely enough. It was only in Rome that he did all his killings. Everywhere else in the empire was fine. But the people of Rome was having enough. including many of his guards. Now, he had already killed Macro because he suspected Macro of betraying him, but he also had a great joy in torturing his guards, particularly one of them. This one guard who had a high-pitched voice and a lisp, so he sounded like this all the time. And Caligula would always have him say ridiculous passwords like, "I'm a big dick," or something like that. And of course, the ever-popular scrotum. It's just a funny word, scrotum. So, those guards, along with another guard, I forget his name, but anywho, they all planned together to kill the Emperor. One in guard in particular had a good state because Caligula was shagging his wife, pretty much. So, on the final day, Caligula was going to see the Roman games, the gladiatorial games. The guards took him in the corner and stabbed him repeatedly in the neck, the stomach, the genitals, even around in the chest area, with spears and swords. Then afterwards, they convinced the people of Rome to rise up and tear down every monument that reminded them of Caligula. They then found his doddering old uncle, Claudius, and made him the next emperor, and thus ended the reign of Caligula. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about the movie Caligula. Now, there's a lot of controversy with this film because originally the movie was based off a novella or a screenplay written by Gore Vidal. Yes, that Gore Vidal, who was basically making Caligula as a parable to dictators at the time, or dictators before, like Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin and all that. However, it was then taken by director Tito Brass, an Italian filmmaker, and he took out all of the political stuff and just made it a full-on satire of politics, which Gore Vidal didn't like, so he had his name removed, except from the final cut. Well, that's that. But then Tito Brass didn't want to be involved with the film, because producer Bob Guccione, the head of Penthouse at the time, had taken the liberty of including pornographic material into the film, so he walked off the set. So the film is technically a Bob Guccione production. And that's not even the weirdest thing. There's so much weirdness with this movie. It's like a high-budgeted Roman epic combined with, well, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, hardcore pornography for Roman enthusiasts, I suppose. And every actor involved with the film was pretty much, well, they don't like you bringing up that movie, shall we say. None of the actors did. Especially Malcolm McDowell, considering he had just literally made A Clockwork Orange before this film. The only person that seemed to enjoy being in the film was Helen Mirren because, well, Helen Mirren's awesome. Of course she is. But the film itself is very strange in itself. Now, the version I had all of the more hardcore stuff removed, shall we say. There's still a fair bit of, well, unsavoriness in it, but it's still, I had to look up for most of the other stuff online and on websites I prefer not to bring up, shall we say. I guess maybe Roger Ebert had a good point. Who would want to watch this film? Yes, Roger Ebert couldn't even finish this film. That's, something. But the film's interesting in itself. It does get some aspects right about Caligula, about how he was, you know, extravagant and cruel and all that. But it does some stuff that I couldn't quite agree with. For example, in the movie, we see 2 ballet scores used in the film. And they're from the Spartacus Ballet and Romeo and Juliet. And they literally don't add anything, pretty much. I get the feeling they just added in to put in pretty music while every horrible thing is happening, kind of like what they did with Hannibal called Holocaust. And speaking of which, that reminds me, this film has something in common with another exploitation film, Salo. Yes, really, it has one of the actors from Salo in it. He plays the guy that murders Caligula. He's the guy that says Mangia from Salo. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'm fine. I just had some flashbacks. But there's a lot of things it doesn't get quite right in terms of accuracy. For example, it looks like they're playing with what looks like Roman basketball for the most part. And then there's the map of modern Europe in the background for Caligula. And then there's the fact that, well, it's set in pagan Rome. But there's one problem. Pagan Romans were not known to be circumcised. And unfortunately, this movie does have a lot of close-ups of, well, penises. And it does show that they are all circumcised. But honestly, that's not surprising. That's... yeah. Just leave that alone. I've got to admit though, this is a strange cast. We have both Italian and British actors in this film, and most of the Italians have been dubbed pretty much. As I said, there is Malcolm McDowell as Caligula, who does do a pretty good job, even though he's clearly just going with whatever shit's going on pretty much. For example, apparently he actually helped write a lot of the screenplay for this, and there's lots of scenes in the film where Malcolm just improvised. For example, there's the scene where he fists a man. Yes, he fists a man. And supposedly, around this point, he puts a flower in his bottom. Apparently, McDowell improvised that part, and he actually did put a flower in that actor's tushy. When in Rome, am I right? Speaking of which, I have a theory about why this film has a lot of nudity and all this grotesque shit. Rome was not a good place back in the pre-Christian days. For example, well, first of all, it's pagan Rome, and pagan Rome was known to be basically a pervert's paradise. Graffiti of penises everywhere, sex slaves with men, women, even children, unfortunately. So I guess that's what the movie was trying to do. It was trying to show a slice of life in pagan Rome, but they went way over the top. Now, why did they bother calling it pagan Rome? I have a theory. It might have something to do with when Caligula called himself a god. As you see from that famous line, I have existed from the time immemorial. I have existed from the beginning, and I shall exist until the last star falls from the sky. Although I have taken the name of Gaius Caligula, I am all men as I am no man. That for it makes me a god. Now, Caligula did declare himself a god, and he even declared his sister Drusilla a goddess after she was, after she died. However, well, that caused a bit of a stir in the Roman Empire when he did that, because a year ago his uncle, or his grandfather Tiberius, had personally seen to the execution of a certain Jesus Christus. Yes, Jesus Christ, I believe some people call him. And so now there was a new huge Christian demographic in Jerusalem. And when Caligula declared himself a god, it almost caused a bit of a stir in the Christian kingdoms. So it took to but thankfully it didn't go full revolt because of some guy called Herod, who took care of it all. Yes, that Herod. Your Herod's case now, as he said. And after all that, there was that consistent rumor that Caligula thought himself able to talk to the goddess Isis, which even the movie does, which is strange because Isis is an Egyptian god, not a Roman sun god. He said he could talk to Jupiter, but never Isis. I don't know why they bothered to put that in. They don't really do anything with it, really. Moving along. Speaking of the cast, I do admit I do love the actor who they picked for Tiberius in this film. In this film, Tiberius is played by, well, Peter O'Toole himself, Lawrence of Arabia. And the acting on Peter O'Toole is clearly the inspiration that you get when you've been drinking too much. Because Peter O'Toole admitted that he drank and drank while on this film. And you can tell because, well, Tiberius in this film just makes it look like he's a drunken, decrepit old man with syphilis marks and scars all over his face. And he always has to emphasize when he means something by shouting, "Molten fiction!" He even demands that Little Boots does his little war dance. Dance for me. Delight me. Dance! Which later Caligula forces his wife to do the same for his horse Insectatus. Show Insectatus your dance. And then there's Sir John Gielgud as, well, Tiberius' old friend who committed suicide. He's literally only in there for one scene, and apparently Sir John Gielgud method acted by being in the tub the whole time. It got to the point where Malcolm had to go, "Do you need something there, John?" "Oh, yes, where's the bloody script again?" But my favourite actor in this film has to go to Helen Mirren, obviously. She shows off her lovely figure in there. And she seems to be having a good time. She plays Caligula's real-life wife at the time, Caesonia. Now, Caesonia, there's not a lot on Caesonia. She was a patron maiden for one of the goddesses, I believe. One of the goddesses' temples. And according to some reports, she was just as conniving as her husband, which made them the perfect match. He would supposedly always remind her, as a cute little reminder, "Just remember, my dear, I could have you executed at any moment," which she found exceedingly funny for some reason. In this movie, she's described as the most promiscuous woman in Rome, which that's just a thing added for the movie, and also so we can see her tits. As the old saying goes, "I thought you didn't like virgins. I've never met one." That is correct, Caesonia. Oh yes, the movie is a hot mess, to say the least. It's got little bits of plot about the rise of Caligula, but most of it's overshadowed by the pornographic scenes, including a scene with two lesbians pissing on a corpse. Yes, that scene, I'm talking of that. Thank you, cinema snob. But I try to keep it short. I try to wrap this up. Positives of the film. The positive, I would have to say, the cast does look like they're actually kind of trying at times, especially Malcolm McDowell, even if he has to say this for his final line: "Scrotum." And the sets and the costumes are quite extravagant, even if they don't barely cover anything. Trust me, I know. But those are just a few of the positives, because this film was really hard to watch, I'm afraid. It gets a lot of stuff that doesn't even make sense, like Caligula being afraid of ravens, which was never a thing. I think it's just for symbolism. And also, the pornographic scenes are... they're nice, but I don't think they should be in this movie. No, I don't. And being a historical nerd, I can't not take it when I see that giant lawnmower. Even if you do hear him say the immortal lines, "If only all of Rome had but one neck." Well, there's a few characters in there that are horribly translated for the screen. Most of the main characters are okay, but the supporting characters I could not care most about. For example, there's this giant character that's only listed as the Giant, but it's weird. He's supposed to be Caligula's bodyguard and everything. By the way, there was no real giant bodyguard in real life. But the actor who they got to play the Giant is actually shorter than McDowell, actually. So how am I supposed to take the Giant seriously when he's shorter than the main character? And then there's... well, there's this one character, Longinus, and one of the Roman gods, played by the character from Sallow. They don't really do much in the film, they just scheme and all that, but they come across as a bit stupid because they're like, "He's gone mad." Really? You couldn't tell with the gigantic lawnmower that was built to decapitate people? Really? That's besides the point. My most infuriating casting choice was with the character who they got to play Claudius. Now, Claudius is a very interesting figure in Roman history, and in fact he's one of the more interesting Roman emperors to ever ruled. He's the one that conquered Britain. He's a man who was plagued by family insecurities and intrigue. But in this film, he's basically Fatty Arbuckle. I'm not even kidding, he looks like Divine, but without the drag makeup, basically. Now that's to be fair, Claudius was known as a bit of a jester in his early days before he was the Roman Emperor. But he was also known to be quite wise and quite dignified, so it kind of pains me to see him in this sort of light. It feels a bit of a discredit to who Claudius really was. But if you want to see a better film that involves both Caligula and Claudius, like I say, go check out the mini-series I, Claudius, starring Derek Jacobi, or is it Derek Jacobi? Whomever, as Claudius, and Sir John Hurt as Caligula. That's quite good. Even if we do see him eat his unborn son, that's... leave that alone. But there are other things that sort of piss me off, shall we say. For example, it makes this legends thing about how Caligula was afraid of ravens. Now, in real life, Caligula wasn't afraid of ravens at all. There's no evidence about that. But why did they include that? Well, ravens in the ancient Greek and Roman worlds were bad omens that were known to bring ill tidings that the gods would bring upon them. So, I guess they only included the raven as reference to that, and the fact that when he gets assassinated, the man who kills him just so happens to have a raven upon his armor breastplate. Symbolism, ooh. But the most infamous thing that I can't forgive is, of course, the pornographic scenes. They don't advance the plot. They're only in just to, well, pad out the runtime with, well, a different kind of padding, if you know what I mean. And this includes scenes involving, well, you'll forgive me, YouTube, for saying this, but things involving things from a man with a ass on his stomach getting a rim job, a person getting an entire snake shoved up her a sex swing, a feather machine that's used for a particular type of tickling, if you know what I mean, ladies. We see people getting mutilated, raped. We see a man's penis and balls cut off. The penis is fed to the dogs, and the balls are sent to his wife, and his corpse is pissed on by two lesbians there, who, I don't even know why they're there, they're just there, pretty much. And of course there's the infamous boat orgy scene with the senators' wives, which again might be based off some Roman propaganda, because we have no evidence that he would have done something quite that extreme. But if I had to explain what really gets me off about the sex scenes is that, again, there's no point for them being there. If you're going to make a Roman porno, go ahead, make a Roman porno, but don't make it with well-distinguished actors and all that. Just, I don't know. I feel like Caligula could make a good movie if you took it all out, but you'd have to be really inventive to portray his particular type of madness, because yes, he was depraved and a bit of a pervert, but he was more than that. He was the type of crazy we don't make anymore, unfortunately. Such is life, I'm afraid. But do you know what isn't such as life? Is that I should say that you should like and share this video, and hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to share, and to also hit the bell for notifications. And we have more of our stuff on our social media, such as Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And there's also more videos on World Builder Studios and Silversmith Productions. And now, would you excuse me? I need to watch Rome burn.